The morning began like any other at Lorraine Kelly's studio, producers buzzing with coffee-fueled energy, makeup artists weaving between guests, and Lorraine herself reviewing her cards with her usual calm poise. The only thing that stood out was the heightened anticipation in the room. Denzel Washington wasn't just any guest. He was the kind of star whose presence could elevate an entire week of programming. Everyone expected an easy, charming interview. What they got instead was something no one in the room would forget. When Denzel stepped onto the brightly lit stage, the audience erupted into applause. He carried himself with a dignified ease, offering a warm smile as he took his seat opposite Lorraine. She welcomed him graciously, her Scottish lilt smoothing the edges of every word. The first few questions flowed effortlessly, typical morning show fare. They talked about the weather, his flight, and his long career. It was relaxed, even friendly. But Lorraine, ever the seasoned interviewer, wasn't content with predictable answers. She wanted the moment viewers would talk about, and so she shifted the conversation toward Denzel's latest film, a dark, introspective drama that had already gathered buzz. Denzel leaned in, speaking with passion about the emotional weight of the project, the months of preparation, the intensity of the role. The audience listened, enthralled. Then Lorraine pivoted. "There've been reports," she said lightly, flipping through her cards, "that things got tense on set. Some creative disputes, particularly between you and director Marcus Hale. Any truth to that?" The shift was subtle, but Denzel caught it instantly. His smile tightened just a fraction. "You know how these things go," he replied calmly. "People like to talk, but the work is what matters." Lorraine wasn't satisfied. "Well, one source claimed the two of you had a shouting match. Something about a script change." She raised her eyebrows as if inviting him to confirm. Denzel let out a quiet breath. "Lorraine," he said, still steady, "I don't really focus on rumors." "Of course," she replied with a sweet but insistent tone, "but surely the fans would love to know whether there's any truth behind them." The audience murmured, sensing the growing tension. Denzel didn't look angry, just tired. As though he'd walked into a room expecting a conversation about his craft but instead found himself cornered into a tabloid interrogation. "I'm here to talk about the film," he repeated, a little firmer. Lorraine nodded, but the glint in her eyes didn't soften. "Fair enough, but art doesn't happen in a vacuum. The process is part of the story, isn't it? Especially when it gets heated." That word, heated, hung in the air. Denzel shifted in his chair. "I think you're trying to create a moment where there isn't one." It wasn't said with hostility, it was said with truth. And Lorraine didn't like it. "Well," she said, voice sharpening just slightly, "my job is to ask questions people are curious about. Some actors are more open than others." A low, "ooh," drifted from the audience. Denzel's eyebrows lifted. "My being private isn't a flaw," he replied. "Nor is it a refusal to engage." Lorraine offered a thin smile. "Then maybe you can clear the air about the rumored disagreements." "No," Denzel said simply. "Because there's nothing to clear." Another murmur rippled through the studio. Lorraine straightened her note cards as if recalibrating her approach. Instead of backing away, she pressed further. "All right, then let's talk about your family. Your son recently." Denzel cut in, gently but definitively. "Lorraine, I don't discuss my family on air. You know that." The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Lorraine blinked, caught off guard not by anger, but by the unexpected firmness. "Well," she said slowly, "I think many of your fans feel a connection to you that goes beyond your films. Personal insight is part of." "I respect the fans," Denzel interjected. "I always have, but respecting them doesn't mean opening the door to my private life. If that's a problem, we can stop right here." The audience gasped. Lorraine sat back, surprised, considering her next move. The producers exchanged frantic glances. The cameras, still rolling, captured every shift of expression: Lorraine's tightening jaw, Denzel's steady resolve, the studio's collective breath held in suspense. Before Lorraine could respond, a producer hurried toward the edge of the set, signaling frantically. The show abruptly cut to commercial, leaving the room, and soon the entire viewing audience, buzzing with disbelief. The calm morning show had just veered into uncharted territory, and no one knew what awaited after the break. When the show returned from the abrupt commercial break, the atmosphere in the studio had changed completely. The cheerful pastel backdrop and upbeat theme music suddenly felt out of place, almost mocking the tension that still clung to the air. Lorraine Kelly sat upright in her chair, hands clasped tightly in front of her. A practiced smile had been painted back onto her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. The audience, still whispering among themselves, quieted as the cameras resumed rolling. Denzel Washington stood beside his chair, not storming off or raising his voice, but exuding the calm authority of a man who had already made up his mind. He appeared ready to give the interview a second chance, but it was clear that the ground beneath them was no longer steady. The illusion of a friendly morning chat had shattered. Lorraine tried to reclaim control immediately. "Welcome back," she said with forced brightness. "We had a small, technical issue. But we're back now with the legendary Denzel Washington." Denzel returned to his seat but carried himself differently, shoulders straighter, expression more guarded. "I'm happy to continue," he said, "as long as we're talking about the work." The audience applauded lightly, though the clapping was hesitant, fragmented. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something rare, not a dramatic outburst, but a boundary being set by one of the most respected figures in Hollywood. Lorraine nodded, but her jaw tensed. She shifted through her cards again, clearly trying to regain her footing. Then, attempting to smooth things over, she added, "Of course. I never meant to pry. But surely you can understand the interest." It was the "surely" that did it. A small word, but it carried an implication, as if he were being unreasonable for maintaining boundaries. "I understand curiosity," Denzel replied evenly. "But I also understand respect." The audience murmured in agreement, sensing the subtle sting in his phrasing. Lorraine's cheeks flushed ever so slightly. For a moment, she hesitated, and it looked as if she might steer the interview back to safer territory. But something, ego, pressure, or the unmistakable awareness that millions were watching, pushed her to speak again. "Well," she said with a brittle laugh, "I suppose some stars are more sensitive than others. Comes with the territory, doesn't it?" The room froze. The crew went still behind the cameras. The comment wasn't overtly hostile, but it was loaded, sharp enough to provoke, yet vague enough to deny if challenged. Denzel inhaled deeply and gave a slow nod, the kind someone makes when they've given all the patience they have. "Lorraine," he said, voice like steel wrapped in velvet, "I'm not sensitive. I'm principled. There's a difference, and I won't participate in an interview that tries to turn something genuine into something sensational." Lorraine's smile faltered. "I'm simply doing my job," she replied, sounding defensive. "And I'm doing mine," Denzel countered. "Which includes knowing when a conversation stops being about the craft and starts being about headlines." A beat of silence followed, long, heavy, and impossible to edit around. Then Denzel stood, not abruptly, not angrily, but decisively. "If this is the direction we're going, then I'm done." The studio erupted into whispers. Lorraine blinked rapidly, stunned that he was truly walking away. She lifted a hand toward him, half in protest, half in bewilderment. "Wait, Denzel, can we just..." Before she could finish, the floor manager approached from off-camera, speaking quietly but firmly. "We're going to wrap this segment," she said. "Let's cut." Lorraine looked blindsided, not because she disagreed, but because the decision had been taken out of her hands. Denzel didn't appear triumphant, he simply nodded respectfully. "Thank you," he said to the crew, with more warmth than he'd shown in the last 10 minutes. He walked toward the side exit of the stage, moving past lights, cables, and stunned staff members who stepped aside without speaking. Some offered hesitant smiles or gentle nods of respect. Denzel returned each one graciously before disappearing behind the curtain. Back on set, Lorraine faced the camera alone. She inhaled sharply, piecing together what remained of her composure. "Well," she said, clearing her throat, "live television can be unpredictable. Misunderstandings happen. We wish Denzel all the best." Her voice wavered on the last word. The audience wasn't convinced. The moment the show ended, social media detonated. Clips were uploaded before the credits finished rolling. Viewers debated fiercely, some saying Lorraine crossed a line, others insisting she was being a journalist. But almost everyone agreed that the tension was unlike anything morning TV had seen in years. Producers huddled in the control room, phones ringing nonstop. Staff members whispered their own interpretations. Meanwhile, Denzel's calm exit became the image replayed again and again, the quiet power of a man refusing to be cornered. By afternoon, the event had transcended entertainment news. Memes, think pieces, reaction videos, everywhere, people were talking about boundaries, respect, and the unexpected drama that unfolded on a show known for soft interviews and warm smiles. One thing was undeniable. The morning segment had turned into a media earthquake, leaving Lorraine, Denzel, and the entire industry to pick up the pieces in its aftermath.